my specialty is really the entrepreneur, taking care of the entrepreneur and their legal issues, whether it's in the business, planning for the next stage of the business, or related to the household or otherwise.
Here today with Marshall Jacobini, the entrepreneurial attorney. What does that mean? Stay tuned to hear more about his faith, his family, and why he serves the clients the way he does.
Marshall, welcome. Tell us what in the world made you decide to do what you're doing.
There's probably a lot of things that led me down the path to decide to do what I'm doing. Originally, my father was an attorney, and I think growing up, I just avoided ever wanting to be an attorney. I was always a servant, but once I got farther along in my educational career and actually took the blinders off a little bit and took some law classes, I found a home where I could mix my servant mindset with something I actually like to do academically and educationally. So that's what got me into it originally. And then from that point in time forward, I've just found more and more ways to do different things and entertain my brain that sometimes gets bored doing the same thing over and over again, put it that way.
So you figured out a way to be engaged in your practice as an attorney in the state of Texas.
Yes, sir.
And what are the ways that you serve your clients?
Well, it depends on the type of client. Sometimes I'm trying to help the entrepreneur deal with what's going to go on with the next generation once they're gone, what's going to happen with their business, what's going to happen with all their assets, what's going to happen with their family legacy plan. Sometimes we're helping them create plans that maintain that legacy plan. Sometimes we're dealing with situations where we're trying to get acquisitions set up to the next generation, to those family members of the entrepreneur. Sometimes we're dealing with crazy issues where they've got family probate cases and people like to make a play for anything they ever think they can in those cases. So sometimes we deal with a lot of acrobatics there, put it that way.
And how do you avoid that?
Which one?
Acrobatics and people with their grabby hands during estate meetings.
That basically the best solution you can do there is to actually have a great estate plan and have your will set up properly. There's myriad different options there, but if your estate plan is not that well, then that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Put it that way.
Would you like to share with us a story where it was a problem and how you dealt?
Well, most of the time when people come to me when they've got those problems, I wasn't the one that drafted the estate plan. Put it that way. So I've never had to avoid it. Put it that way. It's come to me where it's already happened. But dealing with the situation in probate is what it is. Sometimes you have beneficiaries, or sometimes you have family members that are not beneficiaries, and they feel slighted. They want to try and make a play for something. They want to try and contest the will. Well, a lot of the time, even if they get like a small gift, but not everything, you can usually get some sort of family settlement agreement together done that will get everybody calmed down and move things down the road without there having to be an actual contest action filed in probate. And a lot of the time when somebody has a serious claim, then it's a matter of trying to settle that issue before anybody ever has to go to court and expend fees to burn up the estate, because that's generally what happens a lot of the time unless you're dealing with a very, very large estate.
What has been your experience on why people procrastinate establishing an estate plan?
I think there's multiple reasons. I think one of them is we just do not like to, as humans, we don't like to think about our own mortality. Mm-hmm. And so there's a natural aversion to thinking about that to begin with. Number two, people don't make it enough of a priority. And one thing I have noticed is the folks that have never really experienced it anecdotally through their family or personally, they are very much less likely to make that a priority. A lot of the time when people come to me, it's one of the first things they say is, yeah, my Aunt Judy just, she passed away and we just went through all this crazy stuff and I don't want that to happen with my family. Mm-hmm. So that's usually a big primer for folks. Otherwise, the more prudent ones, once they start to get older and they know they're getting older, they're usually prudent about it and then they do something about it. But otherwise, it's like one of the last things people ever want to do, but it's one of the biggest decisions you really need to make before you pass, to not just make sure what you want happens, but to take care of the family you hopefully love as well and not create nightmare of a situation for them to deal with.
Seen that both in our firm, the challenge that clients face when the original will couldn't be located, even when there wasn't a dispute. And then with my own family, with over a 20-year-old will, so some of the language was a bit, I'll call it outdated and unclear. So those were both challenging cases for different reasons.
The financial advisors see some strange stuff too, and they have people and families that come to them with inherited assets over time. I've seen some really wild stuff. I've got a few things going on right now where there's a lot of property and assets sitting out an unclaimed property index that were originally part of a whole financial plan, and the parents ended up both passing away. One of the siblings didn't probate the parents' will, started doing all kinds of crazy stuff with things and taking money when they should have been taking money. And then brother dies. And then now the siblings are trying to figure out all this. And they found out there's hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in the unclaimed property index. And then there's a pension or an annuity life insurance and crazy stuff.
Yeah, why don't you explain to folks watching you what the heck an unclaimed S-sheet is, Marshall?
Okay, yeah, that's a good. Not everybody knows about that. So basically, after a certain amount of time, financial institutions, if they're holding, financial accounts, assets for you, as well as other types of property, but a lot of the time, that's usually what you see. If an asset is supposed to pay out, or they have not had contact from the owner of the account for XYZ amount of time, then eventually that asset will escheat to the unclaimed property index. And so what happens then is it sits there in that index for, I don't even know how long it's been there for a long time. But then you have to make a claim for it. And part of making a claim for the property in the unclaimed property index is it's part of the same type of process an executor goes through during probate when they go in to collect all the assets after they're appointed. So what happens is family members will find out sometimes that there's a lot of this stuff sitting in the unclaimed property index nobody ever knew about. When we go to probate the will, we find all this and we end up collecting it from the property index. There's other situations too where you might be able to get away with not doing probate and still getting access to those assets, but it's more of a limited case-by-case basis type of.
Marshall, as an attorney with how many years experience now?
14. Yeah, 14. So it'll be 15 this year in November.
Do you have any happy stories you'd like to tell us about estate?
Some of the happiest story. It's funny. When I pick up the phone and talk to folks about legal issues, most of the time it's really not a joyful time for folks. They're dealing with some sort of predicament or dilemma, and it's usually emotional as well as just, overall difficult period. But when you have the folks that are adoptions are probably one of the most joyful things in law you ever see. And so I've done volunteer work for Adoption Day, and I've done a few adoptions before. So those are probably one of the most joyful times. Otherwise, people are happy when, if you represent the entrepreneur that's selling their business and getting ready to retire, that's definitely a joyful time once they're through all the minutia of trying to get everything there. But
we have run into that, and one of the horror stories as a financial advisor that I've heard too many times from attorneys and from business brokers is half the time it seems like the business owner has spent his whole life or her whole life or their whole family's life investing in that business and have no idea what to do with the gazillion dollars they're about to get. And a good attorney like yourself will explain the tax consequences associated with that landfall or windfall or basically a fire extinguisher, bunch of cash flowing toward you. Have you ever run into that, and how so have you helped clients solve that?
I have. There's different options in terms of what you can do, but sometimes what folks do is they'll do it if you can get agreed to by the parties in terms of the payment method, but you can take the proceeds through a structured sale, dump it into an annuity. There's a few different ways to avoid some of the major gains issues that you might incur by, taking it all lump sum.
At Check Financial, we've helped negotiate with that with folks, and occasionally we run into an attorney that's not quite as adroit as you are. I just put it that way, to be as kind as I possibly can. And traditionally, most financial advisors are not certified public accountants with 20 years of experience before they became certified financial planners. and have negotiate sales for a gazillion different things over time. So that's one of the things at Checky Financial we're lucky enough to do, even though you can have white hair and not know anything. But if you've had a lot of experience and have no trouble saying to people, let me try and explain to you the consequences of what you just said to me.
Your practice goes well beyond estate planning. So tell us some of the other areas that you serve your clients and some of the things you might be even more excited about.
Well, I'm generally just excited to serve and help. I grew up waiting tables, and that was one of the funnest things I got to do because I just literally got to serve people and make them happy and see a smile on their face every day. So I've got that service. I've developed my niche over time by serving people that way. And it's gotten to now to where I'm literally like the entrepreneur's attorney. So I don't just help them with their estate planning and their probate and their business succession planning and selling it off, but I also try and help keep peace in their household as well. So that could be the situation where they're involved in a business divorce, not necessarily a family law divorce, husband and wife, but partners in a business. Those are sticky situations. And if somebody did not draft all the documents at the beginning in a clear manner to set things up properly, then the business divorce becomes even more problematic. But honestly, I did a lot of family law for the first 3 to 5 years of practice. And so as I've been doing business divorce, I've found it interesting that I've been able to take a lot of the how to deal with emotion and personalities in those cases and move it over into the business divorce type of cases. It really does actually help, and it makes you feel good that you can keep somebody at peace and help them move along and separate from that situation and hopefully move into a better situation in the future. Because what I really like about those is not so much looking at the darkness and getting out of the pit, it's what it looks like after the pit. Because we're talking about how we're going to settle the dispute or litigate the business divorce, but we're more so looking at what are we going to do after this and what does the plan look like after that. So I get happy when I get to do that. When I take care of the little household things, I'll give you an example. I had a client one time who, no fault of her own, really. She had other people in the neighborhood had basketball goals and stuff like that. But she had one of these basketball goals that isn't firmly planted, sitting out for an extended period of time. HOA sent her notices saying, you're not supposed to have this stuff out here. That went on for like a period of 6 to 8 months. And I think, significant amount of fines and fees had racked up. And then it was getting to the point where they were ready to pull the trigger on something. And then it got to me, well, they never levied them correctly in the first place. So I ended up sending them some correspondence and it pretty much blew the whole thing out of the water. And then they never bothered her with it again. She did take the goal down, but either way, So fun stuff. I get to do fun stuff like that as well when I'm helping the entrepreneurs. So, and it keeps me from always doing the same thing over and over again.
Now you're a sole practitioner or part of a firm?
I'm part of a firm. I used to be up until about the end of January this year. I used to be at a downtown firm in Fort Worth at one of the Bass Towers, and I was there partner level for about 6.5 years. And then now I'm with Grable Martin PLLC, and it's actually a larger firm, but we're kind of spread out in smaller locations all throughout the state. So we're in Fort Worth, of course, Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Corpus. But the firm now, there's about 36. I think there's 36 of us now, and there's a new one joining here soon. But this firm is all partner level attorneys that come from former big law type of firms. And a lot of us are sitting kind of like a fractional general counsel, entrepreneurs counsel role. And then we also have a lot of folks that are more specialized. The example I give is if you were a legal department or the head in-house for a legal department of a business, there are certain times when you don't have the specific niche experience you need to get something done. And so you have to pull from other places, firms, etc. The way my firm is designed is we have the folks that are like the fractional general counsel, and then we have the ones that are the specialized niches on the spokes on the wheel too. Like we have tax counsel, we have several different types of patent and IP counsel. We have board certified real estate. We have people that work in food and bev, people that work specifically with SaaS. I mean, we have a commercial bankruptcy section. But the way we all work is we're very collaborative. So we literally pull who we need practice group wise and come together and just work together.
Wanted to draw that out because since you're such a great storyteller and have such a wonderful smile, and please take that as a compliment in both cases. It almost sounded like I'm all here by myself doing all this stuff. And I knew for a fact that you have a whole bunch, just like we do, of different folks with whom we consult with, and so do you. In terms of the advice that you'd like to give to your 20-year-old self, can you think of anything you would like to have told yourself if you could talk to yourself from all this experience that you have? You're still a relatively young guy from my point of view, to your 20-year-old self. What would they
My 20-year-old self, I think that it's hard to put into words, but if I could tell myself to be more forward looking when I was that age, at what the path for the future do you really want, and what do you want it to look like when I was 20, as opposed to actually thinking more about that once I actually got married and had a family, started a family. I think it would have moved my track ahead faster, put it that way, than where I am right now on my career path. So if that's probably that, and I wouldn't change that. I was going to say, I think I might tell myself, you might think about doing family law and just not do that and do something else. But doing that for the first 4 or 5 years, that gave me some unique experience that I take into everything else I do. I mean, even down to negotiating, settlements and issues and contracts. You learn a lot about human behavior just dealing with that type of law. So that's why I second guessed myself and I said, no, I wouldn't take that back, actually, because that was one heck of a learning experience.
I was vocational student ministry for 9 years before I joined John Checky in financial services. And it's interesting because I was asked, what is it like to no longer be in ministry? And I had to just kind of laugh to myself. And like, I continue to get to minister to people today. It just also includes their finances.
Well, that's kind of the way I look at things too. And honestly, I was not heavily involved with my faith until I got married and had a child. But since then, and I want to say probably over the past 6 to 7 years, I've really seen a lot with the Kingdom Builders movement and what's going on there. So a lot of what I do in my motivations and in my service is to that mindset, is that, the businesses we're out there building are supposed to be lights as well. And so I am a white hat attorney, and the type of people I serve and the situations we get into, they stay white hat, or there's a door right around the corner, put it that way.
What is the biggest mistake that you see your clients making?
One of the biggest mistakes I see folks make is honestly with trying to use AI for estate planning and things like that, or just paying for something very bare bones, minimal, and then they don't get any help executing it. Because I've seen situations where they bring me wills, and then they don't have specific little pieces of language that need to be there, like to make it what's called self-proved. And then you can't even read who the witnesses are that are on the will that signed it, because nobody was trying to do a proper execution ceremony. And then there's no printed name either. It's just a signature. And so now you're in a situation where you have to try and find these mysterious witnesses to be able to prove up the will, to admit it to probate. And then you might not, and if you can't find them, then you may be in a situation where you can't even get the will probated. And then whatever those desires were are out the door. It's down to Texas law, what the intestacy rules say. So that's a big mistake in business, in the M&A world. One of the biggest mistakes I see is when these folks are in lower end transactions, they feel like they don't need the same protections that you have in a higher end transaction. That's true to a certain extent, but very basic things have to be in some of these agreements, and they want to shortcut it all. It's like you get what you pay for type of thing, and it's problematic.
What is one specific sentence you'd love to see in every will as opposed to just occasionally see?
In every will, let me think. I'd like to make sure that the statutory language that's at the back for the simultaneous execution and self-proving actually matches the statutory language and not something on. I actually had a funny situation one time where it was missing something in terms of, what did it say? It said 18 years of age. And it, instead of saying that it said they were a minor, or I can't remember what it is. It was either 18 years of age or a minor, one or the other, but it was off from the statute. And the judge was basically saying that it did not mean the same thing as being Yeah, it said minor. It said it's not the same thing as being 18 years of age or over. And so I had to do some brief to the court on the Black's Law Dictionary of minor and the dictionary definition equated to the same thing, just to establish that that language was substantially complied with the statute.
What would the language actually be if it was just non-debatable?
If it was that they're over X, Y, you have to follow the language in the statute that's over X, Y, Z years of age or not a minor, etc. But the point was this, is that I had to go define something based on outside sources to the court in order to get them to go along with it. If you just match the specific language in the statute, then you don't have to worry about whether it substantially complies or not. It just works.
So if you follow the recipe verbatim, you bake a great cake and estate, and if not, it's kind of a mess. Now, do attorneys make more money from poorly written wills?
That depends on the attorney. Put it that way. I mean, it depends on the estate. The attorney that's representing somebody that's potentially trying to contest something, well, they're going to make a lot of money if the estate plan is blown up, because they're going to make a lot of money in fees chasing that litigation. From my standpoint, in terms of if I was trying to administer an estate like that, I would naturally make more money because there's more work and more stuff you have to do. It's more of an expense for everything else. That's one of the other reasons why when I'm doing planning, we're trying to get the plan that accomplishes the goal, but keeps everybody outside of probate as much as possible. So all those administration expenses are avoided.
Have you ever been called to a hospital or rehab place to go ahead and do a will in line?
Yes, I have. Unfortunately, I have done deathbed wills 2 or 3 times in my practice. And it's sad, but at the same time, you get to be a hero for some folks in a very bad situation. And if you can carry yourself well while they're going through that and dealing with that situation, you serve his purpose and their purpose at the same time. And so, it's been tough. It's been rough each one I did them, but it was definitely a blessing afterwards.
I ran into that when my mom went to what I call a laughing academy, which everyone else calls a memory care unit. There's no memory care associated with that. And I found a mobile attorney, I'm not making that up, that had her office basically on a 2-wheeler and with a big, not a box, big attache case. And we used to call that a legal brief box back in olden days. And she had a computer in there and ginned out the whole thing, did the interview, and left us with written documents which were executed and witnessed, and with a little data thing to stick in your computer in case you lost all the other documentation. So it was amazing to me. And it was just done that quickly, just after you proved the competency of the person who's being interviewed. So I had no idea until I needed somebody like that. Plus, there are other attorneys that actually specialize in helping you qualify for Medicaid or veterans benefits.
Special needs. Yeah.
And JJ and I went through that with my mom in terms of veterans benefits. It was like having a part-time job for both of us for about 6 months. And then the guy from the Veterans Administration was wearing a little LBJ hat, came to interview me. And I thought, you just can't make stuff like this up. I asked him, do you always wear that hat? And he said, yeah. And I thought, you're one of 2 guys I've ever seen wear that hat, bud. But I didn't mention that to him. I just thought, what a character in terms of that.
What is the biggest or the best compliment you've ever received, Marshall?
Let me think about that for a second. I think the best compliment I've ever gotten from folks is thank you for always being there and being yourself, because that really means a lot to me, because I take integrity in how I present myself very importantly. And so when that is verified back, it makes me feel like I'm on the right track. And so those are really some of the best compliments.
And I've got to attest to that, seeing both Marshall in business and I'll call more casual settings. And he's the same Marshall and in either location, whether it's a suit and tie or a bit more casual on the 4th of July.
That was a lot of fireworks.
And Marshall, all too often I've run into attorneys and financial advisors who forget to take care of their own family. So have you actually put together proper documentation for your family, so in case you have a great day and get promoted and go to heaven, that everybody that you left behind will be happy that you documented what they were supposed to do?
When attorneys are the worst at taking care of their own problems, and they take care of everybody else's problems first. But I do have placeholder wills in set up for me, put it that way. And
what on earth is
I've got non-probate stuff that passes most of it. So
yeah, you're talking about a trust.
Yes, I don't have, I'm not at that level where I need that yet, put it that way. But that is part of the overall plan once I get there. I'm just not ready for it yet. And there's a lot of clients that actually come to me and they are sold on some sort of trust situation. And half the time they do not even need the trust situation. That's another good example. I've had a lot of situations where people end up, they come to you with trust. Somebody died. There was a trust. Hey, not everything was funded to the trust during their lifetime. So now we have to deal with probate and administering the trust. So it just made everything more expensive.
Back in olden days, there was a book that somebody wrote called The Loving Trust. You may or may not have been familiar with that. It was about 4 years ago. And that book was so popular, the guy ended up selling franchises to attorneys. And a lot of young attorneys who thought, boy, I can put together a loving trust. And I remember going to one of those seminars just comic relief. And the audience knew more about estate planning than the poor kid that had actually bought the franchise. That'd be point number one. And point number two, I remember interviewing an attorney saying, okay, do you actually fund this? And he almost asked me what that meant. And I said, let me try and explain this to you, bud. It means putting together that document is fun. And it's great to have a 3-ring binder with all the stuff talked about. But you actually have to take it and redo the titles to assets and what have you to actually put it in the trust. And he said, oh, that's not really my job. And I thought, next. Yeah. So that's how that originated 40 years ago. So the people who lived long enough to have that set up still have that 3-ring binder on the shelf somewhere.
I've seen those. I know what you're talking about. And I'm just like, why? Not everybody needs this. But.
Well, maybe touch on a moment that people may be well-versed and may not be. At what point what's the greatest benefit to a trust? And kind of at what point does that become more or needed?
I say there's a lot of different viewpoints you can look at that from. But when you have blended families that have large estates in them, it's almost an always type of advice issue. Because now those type of situations in blended family, I mean a situation where you've got kiddos from one marriage, one relationship, and then that relationship ends, another one begins, and then half siblings that are born from that relationship. And then obviously new spouse as well. So that's already tenuous most of the time. And it's ripe for somebody in one side of the family or the other, half sibling wise, to get upset about the disposition. So they're already ready to go, to find it. But if you put these things in a trust setup and delineate ways to take care of everybody, make sure they have payouts, et cetera, everything else, and do it properly with the trust and fund it right and make sure everything stays and goes funded into it, then that's a very good way to avoid that situation where somebody can come in and try and contest everything. Because even if they wanted to potentially try and contest a will, it doesn't matter. Everything's funded in the trust and it's going to get controlled to the trust administration. So, because you always have a pour over will with a trust that says, hey, if I forgot to fund anything to the trust, it goes from the will estate to the trust. But that still creates more expense. You got to do a probate action. You got to get it. So either way.
That's the point of setting things up properly and funded, like you referenced. One, because it helps the families who are involved and becomes that hero in that day, like you had referenced earlier on a deathbed situation. But when it is funded properly, just like when John over the years has had the insurance or the investments that have set up the next generation or generations going forward, obviously you're not celebrating the loss or celebrating their life, but as far as being able to help them going forward with what the family and the legacies.
That's a way to create generational wealth too. I mean, with, life insurance policies. And I mean, there's been families doing that for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of how rich people hire people to go, how this actually works is, and then you set that up. And if you've been doing it for a long time, even 14 years is not a short time, and JJ has been doing what he's been doing for most of his career in terms of ministry, and then ministering through financial advice. And if you've been doing CPA stuff for 50 years and financial planning stuff for 38 years, you can say, this is not just an illustration. I can actually introduce you to people who are really enjoying the things we're talking about right now. They bought houses with this, put kids through college with this. And it's great going to a graduation party when everybody's so happy to see you because they realize, thanks to you, I'm going to college and won't have any debt. Or thanks to you, mom and dad are never going to run out of money as long as they live. And we really appreciate what you've done for us. Have a nice day. Have another piece of cake. So in terms of what financial advisors do is we try and put a cherry on top of what you put together. And then, unlike you, an awful lot of attorneys speak in jargon and are totally above the clouds. And we have any number of stories on that. Real quickly, I'll tell you one. Was once helping a retiring financial advisor with an estate planning case for two of his lovely clients who were PhDs. And I listened to the attorney, and I could tell from watching the faces on these two PhDs, they had no idea what was being said to them. And I said, even though we just met, would you like me to explain what he just said to you? He said, yes, I really would. I said, okay, do either of you garden? I said, yes, we do. I said, basically, all he's doing is talking about taking a pot from out of the sun and putting it in the shade where it won't be burnt by the Internal Revenue Service or litigation. That's really what he just said to you. He said, oh, that makes perfectly good sense. The attorney looked at me, he was as flabbergasted as you are. But if you have to explain things ad nauseum to people who are really smart, and it's harder to talk to really smart people sometimes when they get emotional because they become about, well, they're not even in junior high school anymore. They're even before junior high school in terms because they're so afraid of making a mistake. So how do you help people feel comfortable about what you're talking about in terms of estate planning, Marshall?
The biggest thing you do is you make sure and are certain your client understands what you are talking about. When you're at least the law school I went to, you had a writing component that you had to do as part of your final degree plan to get your JD. And the teacher that I had for that, the professor, she made us read this book. I can't remember the name of the book, but the whole book and premise was about how practicing law and learning how to analyze and read law is really kind of like another language. And part of that skill, if you actually understand and frame it that way, I think it actually helps us as attorneys to communicate better with our clients because we do look at it more of a translation type of idea when we're explaining concepts. So that, and part of my growing up until I was about 12, I used to spend my summers out in the country on the farm playing with cows and goats and chickens and everything else. And I'm a Fort Worth boy. So part of me is very academic and educated. And then part of me still has a lot of colloquial expressions like you would probably hear Dr. Phil say. So I try and take an advanced concept and then explain it in a way, maybe not as indirect as you did, John, with that example, but I'll at least change terms or try and make somebody see it visually or re-explain it a different way, etc. It goes back to my original point. Communicate it in whatever mode gets the point across and make sure the client understands that. And that's one of the duties that we have as attorneys to our clients in any field. It's part of the oath we take as attorneys in terms of trying to serve and help clients. So
this is a totally different question. If you could have dinner with three people, who would they be and why? They can be dead or alive.
One would probably be Socrates, and just mainly because I fell in love with the ideas of Greek virtues and the reasoning behind all of that. If you're into that type of stuff and the nature of being good for the inherent intrinsic nature of being good and virtuous. And so that was part of what really inspired me when I was in college and I started actually taking some of the political philosophy and roots of justice and everything else. So, I would love to sit around and have dinner with him and learn from him. That would be one. Number two, who else would I say? I don't have anybody major that I'm thinking of off cuff, put it that way.
Hey, we had some relatives that you loved to death and they got promoted and went to heaven. Is there any of them that you'd like to?
If we're going to frame it that way, then yes. My grandfather was a huge entrepreneur, and he has some crazy story from how he was working in I don't know what it was called then. It was probably Army Air Command or something else, Army Air Force.
Army Air Corps when your granddad was in it.
Thank you. But he was just a crewman on one of the planes going back and forth, and our family's from New York, but he brought our family down here. And it's mainly because he met some girl that he fell in love with and then moved down here to Texas because he was stationed at a Carswell and everything else that was going on back then. And the common story he tells is, he hit this town with, $5 in his pocket or less and started selling awnings to, everybody down the street and figured out how to make that work as much as he could. And eventually, over time got in a situation where he built credit, and then he started getting into developing. And he developed houses, commercial high rises. I mean, not like the giant ones, like the Bass Towers, but like the, 4 to 6 story office buildings and all kinds of housing subdivisions, all kinds of stuff. He used to run
Despite being a Yankee in Fort Worth.
yeah, yeah, that was the biggest deal back then at that time too. And that's funny because I found out when he passed away on his birth certificate, he was actually Francesco, and he went by Frank all the time. That's it. Well, that's probably why the timing, what was going on then. But yes, it is. But no, my granddad was a huge influence on me, and he passed away a few years ago. But what I would love for him to see now is where I'm at now and all the different business and things I'm doing, because I really feel like in my career I'm kind of hitting my entrepreneurial stride. So I would love to see him and have dinner with him again. But I know he sees everything that's going on, so that's completely cool. I'm trying a third. No. I know a third person would probably be Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, that, like, he was the pinnacle Renaissance man, right? Like, he was good at cooking. He was good at inventing. He was amazing at math and science. Like, it seemed like he had the whole gamut, the whole spectrum. And I'm not trying to compare myself in any way, shape, fashion, or form, but my mindset, I like all of these things. I'm on my worship team at church. I have a whole background in track where I was in music, and I love that. I love creative stuff. But then at the same time, I love digging myself into the minutia and a nitty gritty of law and learning about scientific concepts that I have to deal with in law. And then, and I joke, all my friends in college were all the engineers. I was the only liberal arts major, and I took a soft science. And so, it kind of was the way it was, but all my friends were engineers. So I've always had that type of brain, and I love all of it. So it'd be cool to see and talk to him about his history and where that all came from and how he got it.
Boil down your message to folks to let them know what your specialty is and why they should come to see you. Marshall, what would that be?
Well, my specialty is really the entrepreneur, taking care of the entrepreneur and their legal issues, whether it's with regard to their business or their household. I mean, at the end of the day, in a nutshell, that's where I sit. And with the firm I'm at, I have the ability to pretty much almost take on and deal with, any type of drafting or dispute related legal issue they're going to have, whether it's in the business, planning for the next stage of the business, or related to the household or otherwise.
Which, well, being a lifelong learner, which is part of you explained a moment ago, along with the great professionals that you surrounded yourself with, there's a new level of excitement that you have, and also the levels up the ability to be able to take care of your clients, entrepreneurs, their families, and others that could use your assistance as well. So it's the importance of those you surround yourself with personally and professionally, and that shows in your work and beyond.
Thanks, JJ.
And at Checky Financial, we specialize in telling people just two things. Even though I always hold up one finger when I say two things, it's one of those comic book things about being me. One, we like to help people have fun and still have money. And that means not just accumulate money, but actually enjoy having it and actually occasionally spending it on something that brings you great joy, as long as you can afford to do it. And we help people avoid being old, sick, and broke. And that's just as important. No matter how much money you make, there's an awful lot of people that make a lot of money or are enthusiastic their entire life, even when they're on their deathbed, thinking they're somehow going to beat this.
Well, thank you for your time today, Marshall, John, and look forward to our next episode together.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jens.
Have fun and be well.